A couple of months ago, Hito Fuji came to Boston. He said, I'm the general manager of product development for KDDI, the #2 telecom company in Japan. He said, we need more Scrum in Japan. He used to work at Google, and now he's at KDDI. He's built this Scrum organization. But he wants to train all his customers in Scrum and build Scrum. And he says, I want the true Scrum, the Scrum of the grandfathers, Professor Tanaka and Takeuchi. So I went over there, and we got both Takeuchi and Tanaka were there, and we started training KDDI on how are they going to actually create quite a large Scrum organization and business in Japan. So I want to talk about the Scrum that I got from Professor Tanaka. I'm working on a guide, a Scrum at Scale guide right now to explain how we implement Scrum in a way that really works and have implemented it for many, many years. And a lot of people, when I talk to the Agile people, they have kind of a different idea about what this is all about. But for the last 10 years, I've worked with a venture capital company. And for our investors, their goal is to turn $1 billion into $10 billion using Scrum. So getting the Agile teams is just like the beginning. In fact, that's the easy part. We typically can train both the management and the teams, and we can boot up, the second sprint, they'll double, the third sprint, they'll triple velocity. Then we turn all our attention to the product management. Is the company addressing the market properly? Have they done their market segmentation? Have they built a product owner organization? When the teams double and triple performance, is sales doubling and tripling? If it's not, that needs to be fixed. We spend 80% of our time on the business side of the company because our goal is to either take that company public or sell it for a lot of money. So Exact Target, we did sell for $2.5 billion to Salesforce. So these are the kind of things that we want to see happening. And the CEO of the venture firm is totally convinced he runs Scrum totally for the entire venture firm. So this is company Scrum, scrumming the whole organization. And he wants to see that in every company he invests in because his objective is to double the return on investment for OpenView Venture Partners over any other venture firm in the world. And he thinks Scrum can do it, okay? So that's a little different approach to thinking about Agile. It actually has to work, okay? So to do that, you need to scale in many dimensions. It's not just about teams. It's about how do you, all of our companies have distributed teams. They have teams all over the world. And how do you saturate? I mean, it's not enough to have the developers doing Agile. The CEO needs to be Agile. And his management team needs to be Agile. And finance and HR need to be Agile. Okay, so everything needs to be Agile. And it's not enough to say you're Agile. In order to translate that into real production that turns into real market share that drives valuation, you need production to improve and the quality to improve and also the targeting, which we spend most of our time on. What is the right product for the market? Now, I have a company in Cambridge right across the street from the MIT Business School. We do consulting and training all over the world, and most of the customers that we work with are driven by the change that's going on in the world. We all know that computing power doubles every 18 months. That's Moore's Law. And what I didn't fully realize is that the communication bandwidth and speed is actually going faster than that because they have two Moore's Law. They have the hardware side, but also the software actually expands the communication channels at a rate that's as fast as the hardware is accelerating. So So the communication capability doubles every 9 months, and storage doubles every 12 months, and content is even faster than that. So the important thing about that is that if you're in the middle of this Moore's Law kind of environment, which everybody is moving into, because everything is becoming automated and software is driving everything, then the price of your product is going to go down by 95% in a 10-year period. This is extremely disruptive. I was in India last year on a riverboat on the Ganges River for 2 weeks, stopping in all little villages. And I found that the kids in the poorest villages took more pictures of me with their smartphone than I took of them. I mean, the technology is everywhere. Okay. And its impact where we see it is, with the iPhone change, it took the #1 company of the world in mobile devices, Nokia, and it turned them into 0 sales in 4 years. So it doesn't matter how good you are anymore. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter if you're #1, you could be gone in 4 years. And this is particularly relevant to Germany because big car country, right? And this is 2015 data. Market share of Tesla went up 50%. Everyone went down, okay? So mostly down about 20%. So if you lose 20% of your market share every year, in 5 years you have none, okay? So this is causing massive movement within the auto industry worldwide, okay? So major change. So a lot of people don't realize that the true Scrum of the grandfathers was described by looking at lean companies, particularly Toyota, but also Honda, 3M in the United States, several other companies, describing how they do new product development with cross-functional, self-organizing teams. That's where this all comes from. So the true Agile, you would have a lean base. Everything would be lean. And it's from that we derive the Scrum Guide. A lot of people also don't realize that at the Agile Manifesto meeting, there are only 2 widely deployed processes, Scrum and XP. So these are the parents of Agile. Now, everybody's Agile. Everybody's got an Agile idea. There's 1,000 things out there that everybody's promoting. Okay, some of them have great ideas, some of them work, some of them don't work so well. Okay, so how do we get Agile really working? We've tried to write that up in our book. Okay, what have we learned in the last 20 years about implementing this in a way that really works? So that's what we want to talk about. So we're driving this into some pretty large organizations. The organizations we mainly work with are driven by these top 11 Moore's Law technologies. So right at the top is the Internet of Things. That's what KDDI is involved in Japan, okay? But in the United States, GE is one of the leading Internet of Things companies. They're connecting every train, every jet engine, every power plant to the internet. Using big data analysis, they can tell whether a blade in a jet engine is going to crack 6 months ahead of time before it ever happens. Okay. So in order to do this, software has become a major driver. We'll talk more about them later. AI, for autonomous vehicle, in my Tesla, I have a box that in 2000 cost more than $50 million. And now it's sitting in my Tesla. It only costs about a few $100s now, and it's learning to drive my car. Okay, so that's radically altering robotics had a big effect on Scrum. Solar, I'm a big fan of solar. You can see the price of solar is headed to zero. And virtually all new power in the United States and maybe in Germany as well is solar or wind, some hydro. So that's radically altering the equation for energy. It's disrupting the energy. And the prediction is also going to be that the electric battery is going to completely disrupt the auto industry by 2025. I think Norway has already passed a law. You can't sell a car that's not electric in Norway starting in 2025. So if other countries start passing that law, that's a big change for the automobile companies. So let's go back to GE. The general manager of the senior executive of the GE startup, they invested $1 billion, and within a few years, the revenue was $3 or $4 billion. They had 1,000 developers. The senior executive comes to my Scrum training course that we did here the last couple of days. He said, I'm here to learn how to walk the walk and talk the talk. And then you're going to come back and train all my managers. They're all going to be certified Scrum Masters or certified product owners. And so we did that, and by the end of the week of that training, he said, GE board has decided GE is a digital company. We're going to, today I had 1,000 developers, but next week I have 36,000. Every software development in GE worldwide is going to be transferred to my organization, and it's all going to be driven out of Silicon Valley, okay? So that's what GE is doing, and they moved, they said, okay, GE corporate, down by New York City, you guys are in a technology wasteland. We're going to move you right into Boston Tech Center, about a block from OpenView Venture Partners, so that you can be in a little Scrum alley surrounded by Scrum companies. So that's what GE is doing. Total transformation. A lot of our time now is spent with 3M. We've spent several years working with the Healthcare Information Division, which has almost 1,500 developers, doing a rolling wave of scaling it out. Now, the Lean Six Sigma organization that runs the Lean globally for 3M has asked us to take Scrum Global and GM. They want a total and complete transformation. You'll see a picture of what's happened already in 3M HIS. It's going to roll across the entire planet. So major changes. So we start with a team with them, and we need to start with a small team, get the team working really well, and then start to scale it up. But the first thing is we need a model that really works. So here's an example of another company, SimpliVity. It's a cloud company that builds servers and software to, you can buy your cloud systems from them at 20% of the cost that you spend on Amazon Web Services. And so they're selling things like crazy. And they were agile from the start, had several hundred developers, were trying to hire hundreds more as fast as possible. And the Agile coach brought me in to train the management. And as we looked at their Agile implementation, there were a lot of problems, and particularly management problems. The management was going in there and changing the backlog. They were running in there and grabbing people off teams. So I did the training for this team, when this team is running at a velocity of 10, I got the management committed to support the product backlog, support the stability of the team, and in the very next sprint, the velocity is 60. And then they work the patterns that we teach in the course, and the velocity goes up to 160. And they've got 9 other teams running right up this ramp. Okay, so that's what we want to start, because we have a model that really works, and that's the one that we want to scale. I see so many companies that take a bad Agile implementation and then they scale that. And when we're brought in to try to fix hundreds of bad Agile teams, it is worse than trying to transform from waterfall, because they're all claiming they're doing it right, even though their velocity is down here. Okay, so you need to get a subset working and then scale it. So the way we think about scaling is fractal. Intel told me, they said, we got 25,000 people doing Scrum. We learned in the chip business that nothing scales unless it's fractal. And there's only two things that are fractal that people see: the internet, where every node is identical to every other node, and Scrum, if it's implemented properly. So they said to me, Sutherland, do not screw up Scrum at scale. It has to be fractal. So that means there are only Scrum teams, and they're coordinated by a Scrum team. And every Scrum team has a potentially shippable incremental product at the end of a sprint, including the coordinating team. Has a shippable increment for all teams all together. So one of the things I found that is, for some reason over the years, people have not implemented the Scrum of Scrums as a delivery team that's responsible for shipping. By the end of the sprint, or today, more often, many companies are doing it a lot more often. And if you have lots of Scrum of Scrums, then maybe you need a Scrum of Scrum of Scrums. And one of the key things we find at the top, there needs to be a leadership team that is a Scrum team that's responsible for improving the company and dealing with any problems that float up. They need to be, it's a team that's authorized to change the rules, change the software development lifecycle, change the incentive plans, change the job descriptions, change the space. Deal with anything that's blocking in agility. And we find that companies that do not have a leadership team that does that, they're blocked. Their agility is like totally blocked. And as we talked about yesterday, for almost 2/3 of you, you're in that situation where agility is blocked. You have no leadership that is agile. That is the biggest problem out there with scaling today. On the product owner side, okay, we have a product owner for a team. And now we're going to have multiple teams. We need to have multiple product owners. There needs to be a chief product owner coordinating the backlog for all the product owners. And that chief product owner needs to be meeting with the management at that level on at least every sprint, maybe more often, making sure that the management is synchronized with their backlog and supporting it. We find if that's not happening, agility breaks. And for 2/3 of the companies out there, the management is running around messing up the backlog and not aligned with the product owner. So that is a huge thing that needs to be fixed. Maybe, at 3M, they have, a multi-billion-dollar division with many, many Scrum of Scrums, and so they have to go up a level. Here's a chief product owner, okay? And actually, this is more like 3M works right now. A lot of managers are concerned about their career path in the Agile world. But actually, if you can do this well, the career path is great, because the chief executive of 3M Healthcare decided she would be the chief product owner. And she was meeting twice a week with her product owners who own lines of business and her senior management to align them. And within 1 year, GE Healthcare hired her away. She's now doing the same thing at GE Healthcare, running GE Healthcare. So if you know how to do this, the best companies in the world are going to try to steal you away from wherever you're working. So being Agile today and be able to lead Agile is a career-enhancing place to be. Well, what if you're really big, okay? It's all fractal. It all looks the same. It just gets bigger and bigger. actually, this is the actual model at 3M. So their human resources, they call Agile People Operations. This is a Scrum team. Okay? So real scaling means you scale across the company, not just across development. Scrum is not something that makes developers run faster. No, it's something that makes the leadership work better and HR do a better job and so forth. And one of the most fun implementations of Scrum is at SAAB. I'm a former fighter pilot, so I get a kick out of this. Turn that down a little bit. At 7:30 this morning, the SAAB Scrum teams met. At 7:45, the Scrum of Scrums met. At 8 o'clock, the Scrum of Scrums. At 8:15, the Scrum of Scrums. And at 8:30, they've already met. The senior management Scrum met to make sure the entire factory works. We have a great webinar on this where the program manager for the Gripen, which is the world's best fighter, the world's cheapest fighter, comes in at 20% of the cost of the competition. So that's a big Scrum. And it really works. And this is the model that we see. If you can scale Scrum, you can deliver your product at 20% of the cost. You can cut 80% out of the time to market. That's kind of the measure of proper implementation of a fractal Scrum scaling model. And it also requires Scrum everywhere to actually execute on that. Let's go to Toyota, because I have a team at Toyota that's been there for almost a year now. And we start at the senior management level. They flew we're working with Toyota Motors America, okay? Every senior manager in Toyota America has gone through a CSM training and is a certified Scrum Master. And all the business leaders have gone through certified product owner training and are certified product owners. And we've had a team on site there, our own Scrum team, where we have a product owner that drives the transformation. We have a Scrum Master that really works with our coaches, meets every day with our coaches. And we start off with the executive meta Scrum, prioritizing every single project in the entire organization. That's where we start. And then we try to get them working off the top of the backlog. And it is a big challenge. It's a huge challenge when you have managers managing managers managing managers who manage outsourced waterfall projects. They have a lot of those. So the only thing we do there is start working with the legal department, okay? Rewrite the contracts. It needs to be totally turned upside down. But as we get closer to the manufacturing line, these guys are already lean, so we find it's quite easy to implement Scrum close to the manufacturing. And some of them do quite well. I've got some data from one of the teams. This team actually created, their Scrum Master came to training in Boston, and then he went back and he wrote an A3, and in the A3 he described the demands being made on his group and did a root cause analysis of why they couldn't produce fast enough. The intervention recommended was Scrum. He said, give me $90,000 to take the whole team to training and bring a coach back, and we will deliver you $3 million more worth of project the next year. His manager signed off on that A3 without a single red line. It's the only A3 at Toyota that has ever been signed off without a red line and an iteration. So in certain areas, it works quite nicely. We find that it is really challenging because Toyota has a big waterfall IT infrastructure that's been around for many, many years. Changing that is really hard. They said to us, whoa, This is not just Kaizen. This is Kaikaku. It's a revolution because we're not only doing incremental improvement, we actually have to radically change the organization to make this work well. Last month, we were all at BMW, Jean-Pierre and Peter and I think Yuri, we were all there, and we spent a week doing Scrum Master Product Owner training. We did a scaling day in the middle of the week, and I met with the CIO, gave a great presentation, and we went out to dinner, and this is what he told me on the slide, okay? BMW is going to be totally Scrum. This 70% outsourcing that we have, that also Toyota has, we're going to fix that. We're going to 70% insource. And he said, when we get IT all Scrum, we're going to move that right into manufacturing, just like Toyota's talking about. So BMW is interesting to me because it has a culture of innovation that I think is stronger than most of the other companies, with the possible exception of Tesla. And they also have a leadership team that really understands agility, which is unusual. And we come to Tesla, because next month I'm going to Tesla to do training there. Okay? I'm going to do Scrum Master training and Product Owner training. And the guys at Tesla said, we're going to take you, on Wednesday, we're going to take you to the secret rocket factory in Fremont. So I'm really looking forward to that. See if they're scrumming at the rocket factory. We know that we have been in Paul Allen's, the Microsoft founder. He has a rocket organization, and it's like totally Scrum. You walk in, there's Scrum boards everywhere. And I hear that Bezos' rocket company is the same way. But the interesting thing that caused a big uproar in the United States is that last month, Tesla became the most valuable automobile company in the United States. And that gap is going to widen. So they're worth more than General Motors, they're worth more than Ford, and they sell maybe 1% of the number of cars. So this is just the beginning, okay? The distance that Tesla has gone, it's comparable. You compare that to a regular car, it's like comparing an iPhone to an old Nokia phone. And so we'll see whether the Nokia type car vendors are able to respond better than Nokia. Here's another one of our clients that actually is one of the most interesting clients, because this company is actually worth more than Toyota. It's Maersk Shipping Company. And they figured out they need to Scrum shipping. Why? Amazon's buying airplanes, and now they're leasing all the ships that are moving traffic from China to the United States. They got a big problem. And the Wall Street Journal had done a nice analysis before I went in there, showing the price that people would pay for shipping containers. And the cost to Maersk was about twice the price they could get on the market. So they really need to cut costs in half to be profitable. And the same thing was happening in the oil business. Half of their company was oil, and the price of oil was dropping below their break-even point for oil. So before we got over there, they actually had split the company into two, got a new CEO, and we went in and worked with the senior management of the shipping company, talking about how are we going to transfer the shipping. And first thing I did with the senior management, I said, okay, has anybody read the book Moneyball or seen the movie? Has anybody read the book Moneyball in here? Yeah. So. And one of the senior management said, I've read it 55 times. This is one of the reasons that they're the #1 shipping company. They understand Moneyball. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, it has to do with baseball. the Oakland A's were losing most of their games. They didn't have much money, so they hired a statistician who came in and looked at the numbers in baseball and said, you know, the people that drive the most runs are the people that can get to first base. And you can hire someone that can get to first base for not much money, a lot less than hiring somebody that can hit a home run. So let's just hire people that can get to first base. And then their win rate all of a sudden is higher than anybody in the league, and the cost of their salaries is lower than almost everybody else, okay? So the Red Sox tried to hire the manager of the Oakland A's, and he wouldn't come, so they got their own statistician and used the same technique to win the World Series for the first time in 88, I think, or 84 years. Babe Ruth won the World Series back in 1914 or wherever. And I think it was, 2004 was the day that they finally, for the first time, overcame the curse of the Bambino, they called it. They were cursed until they played Moneyball, okay? So, what is the Moneyball of Scrum? Well, we go into companies like, we brought into GE, and they said, hey, we want you to assess 1,000 developers. Tell us what you think. Well, one of the things we found out is that 30% of the developers were doing stuff that the business didn't want. They were just making up their own backlog. Okay, if it's not clear what the product backlog is, people self-create backlog. We've actually seen in some of our clients, they self-create backlog that they're doing for other companies. That's a big problem, particularly if that other company might be a competitor. Do you know what's going on back in the office today? So that's the first thing that needs to be addressed. The leadership needs to get the company focused. Second thing we know, in software, and we're finding the same is true in hardware, that 64% of features are never or rarely used. So 64% of what we build is just junk. So in Scrum, the product owners need to take that on and fix it. And process efficiency, the efficiency of the Scrum teams. How many are using Jira? Almost all of you, okay? That data's in Jira. How many know the process efficiency of your team? Oh, we have one, okay. 2. At GE, they know, it's 5%. They can answer that in 2 seconds. Okay, so those of you who don't know what process efficiency is, if a story should take a day to get complete, fully focused, how many calendar days does it get to done? So for GE, the problem was 1 day of work takes 20 days to get to done. So I've been generous here. I said, okay, let's assume it's 15%. Now, if you multiply those numbers, you get 3.8%. So for a typical organization, that's what they're tapping, 3.8% of the capability. So for boards, for management and leadership, this is the money ball. These are the numbers that they need to drive. People always ask me about KPIs. These are the only KPIs that matter. Everything else is just icing on the cake. So, how do we drive them up? Well, if the leadership really drives agility in the company, really gets the organization focused on a backlog, aligned, it's not that hard to eliminate you don't have to get rid of all of it, but half of the useless stuff that people are doing should be able to get rid of. And if the product owners are really focused and do what we train them to do in the product owner training, they can cut half of we call them junk features, the useless features. They can cut half of the junk out of the product. And if we can get the Scrum Masters to just do a little bit of improvement, it's not hard to drive process efficiency up. I've had an Indian team drive process efficiency to 80% in one sprint. That's how easy it is. They just put their number in their tracking tool so they could watch it. And in 5 days, they were running at 80%. And they were done with everything in the sprint. They immediately were going more than twice as fast. Okay, so the Scrum Master needs to focus on that. And if we do that, you're almost twice the work in half the time, just by working the numbers. And then you can move on from that. If my teams in India can get process efficient to 80%, you could do that in Germany. It's not that hard. But it requires real focus. You have to know what your process efficiency is first. So Scrum at Scale starts with leadership. I have till 10, is that? I want to make sure I don't go over time. When we were putting together Scrum in the early 90s, I was chair of 2 committees at the Object Management Group, and I had hardware guys, and we were talking about Moore's Law. And Moore's Law showed an exponential increase in the power of the computer chips, but software increase in productivity wasn't happening. So one of the challenges was, how do we get software productivity on a Moore's Law curve? So that's what Scrum was designed for. You know, this is Moore's Law. This is Moore's Law's diagram that Moore wrote. Okay, he said, okay, and it's hard to read this on this slide, but in the early 60s, they could get maybe 10 transistors on a chip was the sweet spot, and it cost a lot. And then by 65, they could get 100 transistors on a chip, and it cost a lot less. And a few years later, they got 1,000 transistors on a chip, and it costs a lot less. And how many did they get on a chip today? Billions on a chip. Okay? So how can we do the same thing in Scrum, okay? Beginning Scrum, you should be able to get 10 stories done in a sprint. You really implement what we're training today, you should be able to get 100 stories done in a sprint. If you start to really do continuous deployment, you completely automate DevOps, you should be able to get 1,000 stories done in a sprint. So, and the cost per story drops radically. Okay. Now, to get these Agile implementations working, we've found, and this is Professor Cotter's work at Harvard, he says he only sees it works when the company realizes that Agile is a different operating system. So it needs to be a separate part of the organization with separate leadership that runs under Agile rules, because it's like the Mac OS, where the old organization is like Windows. And if you try to run a Windows application on a Mac OS, you could get a virtual machine there, and it will run slow and it'll look weird on the Mac. But without the virtual machine, it doesn't even run at all. Okay? So it needs to be a separate organization with separate rules. Now, we saw yesterday when you all raised your hands, 66% of you are doing Fragile. Okay? That's where agility is down there, and the development team, hopefully, but the management team is waterfall up in the back, up in the front office. And what they want is a translation layer in the middle, right? So they can get all the waterfall reports. They can give all the waterfall commands and get all the waterfall reports. And underneath, agility is supposed to be running, okay? And we have scaling frameworks that will do that for you today, that are not fractal, and they're not compliant with the Scrum Guide, but they will give waterfall reporting, so a lot of managers like them. In every case where we've seen a sustainable Agile implementation, that picture has changed, and the management has, well, before I get there, in those organizations, you can tell that that's the state, because they have all these dependencies between teams. They have these component teams. This was actually Skype. If they changed one line of code, it took 7 months to ship a new version of the product. And so they had to start systematically taking this apart. I think they fixed one team in this mess, and it went from 7 months to ship to 4 months. So now they got to cut it in half again and just keep doing that, okay? So that's the fragile symptom. Now, to get it working, the management has to move to the side and support the Agile implementation, which is driven by the product backlog and the product owners. So that's what you see. If you go to Spotify, you'll see the traditional managers are what they call chapter leaders. They do hire specialized people, but they deploy them to teams. And they don't do any day-to-day management of them. They do meet with them and make sure they're trained. We have standards. So they do help enforce engineering practices that are needed to make everything work. So they have plenty of work to do, but they don't mess with a backlog. And they don't run in and yank people off teams. Okay, that just totally disrupts agility. So we see that even as smaller, or Spotify is getting bigger, but SAP is one of the biggest implementations of Scrum in the world. The development organization is over 2,000 Scrum teams today. And where is it all going? There's a great book called Anti-Fragile. You know, anti-fragile, there wasn't a word in English for this, but if you go to the gym and you lift weights, by putting stress on your muscles, they actually get stronger, right? So it's anti-fragile. The more stress, the stronger. So the question is, how can you get a company that gets stronger under market pressure, okay? Well, if the whole company can self-organize to respond in real time, that tends to make them anti-fragile. They get stronger against the competition because they immediately flex their muscles and stress against the challenge. And so these companies have no management at all, and some of them are multi-billion-dollar companies. So all of this is written up in the book. It's in almost every language. In the German version, they call it the Scrum Revolution. So I guess to Germany, it's kind of like a Toyota. You know, this is not just Kaizen. This is Kaikaku. Okay, and we have a new book now. Random House has given us a big contract to write a new book. We thought it might be on scaling, but they said no. The book is on the global transformation that's going on because of technology. Robotics is taking away jobs. Companies are going bankrupt. Right how Scrum is going to help global business survival. That's the book. So we'll see how that turns out. I hope there's a bunch, but we're going to be talking to a lot of companies that have big Agile implementations. So I actually got through this with 5 minutes to spare. Do you want to take any questions?
Yeah, one or two questions here.
Well, I guess.
No hand raising here. Why are you so shy? Any questions? Now's your chance. Over there, okay. Gotcha.
There was a picture with many scrums, and from my position it looks very hierarchical. I don't know the English word. In German, hierarchisch.
Yeah.
How do you work? How do we work to stay agile and not get hierarchical?
The challenge in companies is when you go in, they've had a historical hierarchical organization, so they tend to implement hierarchy in the Scrum of Scrums. And that's happening at SAP as well as 3M. It doesn't need to be that way. The way Scrum is designed is it is a fractal network. And there does not need to be a central node. So in these agile, anti-fragile companies, there aren't any central nodes. And there's only hierarchy as it's needed to make sure certain things are aligned. So that's a good point, yeah.
Hi. I've been in the we state for like some months and I really enjoyed it. But the problem was that for some people it was extremely stressful. It required a level of ownership and bringing yourself in. It was simply too much for them. How can we help those people?
Okay, it's stressful because what's causing the stress?
The level of ownership that I had to take, the level of input that I had to provide. They couldn't just go to work and do their 8 hours a day, but they really had to, I don't know, they really had to get into the job. It became their life.
So in a properly implemented Scrum, what you want to do is take off the pressure. So if people are feeling stress, you need to remove that. And the trick is for a Scrum Master, is how to get the team in a really happy state. And if they feel pressure or they're going too fast, they'll feel stressed, they want to back them off. Interestingly, if teams are going too slow, they feel like they're not that effective and they're not happy either. So how does a Scrum Master get the team in the sweet spot of happiness? Then you implement a process improvement that makes it easier to go faster, and then people feel like they're going too slow. The sweet spot of happiness is actually at a higher velocity. So the production of the team just floats up. And if that happens, the teams feel happier and happier as they're producing more. I mean, that is the Scrum Master trick. Now, if there's poor leadership causing the stress, then that's a constant conflict with the agility. And ultimately, the leadership has to change their behavior to fix that. So the Scrum Masters have got to struggle figuring out how to get leadership trained. That's a good thing. That's a good place to start. That's what Simplicity did. The Agile coach said, managers need training. Get in here, train them all. And then I could go through all the problems that they're causing that are stressing these teams, prioritize them, and challenge them to fix the problems that they're causing. Now, ideally, the CEO of the company would do this if he was Agile, but we don't have that many Agile CEOs, yeah.
So, one last one, maybe.
Last one. Where is it? Over there. Right through the frame here.
Thank you. Would you see also the need to harmonize the retrospectives of Scrum teams?
The way we're working at Scrum Inc., where the entire organization is run with Scrum, we do the retrospectives individually on the teams. Like today, we do 1 week sprints, and I'll be in daily meetings towards the end of the day today because we'll be in Boston for the week. So at 10 o'clock in Boston, they will start sprint review. That will be all teams together. The teams will then go out individually and do the retrospectives. Now, all the Scrum Masters are there, so when they hit a Scrum of Scrums, they'll know what's going on. every quarter, we get everybody in the company together for at least 2 days, maybe more, and we do a quarterly retrospective for the entire company all together in the same room. So that's the way we aggregate in the large. But day to day, it's this individual retrospectives and the Scrum Masters and the Scrum of Scrum surfacing anything that needs fixing. That works pretty well. Because you really want the retrospectives to be small, where people feel free to talk. They can listen to one another.
So cool.
Okay.
Thanks. So just before you get your applause,
Yeah.
I want also to tell the guys here something. We got some of the books, not too much. Some of the books down at the registration desk. And if someone likes to have the chance to get it signed by Jeff, take the chance. And they are gone, they are gone.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so, and now I need to tell something to you. I see this, let's say, the topic that you had with in your keynote so often, because we do so many things together, like this thing at BMW, or last year we had almost the same title, but a complete different presentation.
Yeah.
And this is really astonishing me so much, that you're a real thought leader, taking new things directly, you're absorbing it, bringing it to your stuff. So thanks so much for all this.
Well, thanks for
So
inviting me,
thanks.
as always. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.